Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger of the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 24th, 2022. We're at a moment of heightened danger of an expanding war between the U.S. and NATO against Russia, following the developments of the recent days. These are events which include the assassination of Daria Dugina in Moscow, allegedly by agents of the Ukrainian Secret Service, and also the continued shelling by Ukrainian forces of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The puppet government of Ukraine is continuing to conduct these kinds of irregular warfare operations while they're demanding more weapons. Meanwhile, populations in the transatlantic countries continue to be bombarded by what is called information warfare, which less politely is described as outright lies. This is following a script drafted in 2019 by the RAND Corporation titled, "Whose Story Wins?" Now, a colleague of mine wrote yesterday the following, which I think is highly relevant given this situation. He wrote, "In the proverbial fog of war, there are charges and countercharges by both sides. Yet there is still a difference between those who submit evidence and those who don't, and never even thought to. I might add that they never feel they have to, given the role of governments and media to cover up the truth." An example of this is Joseph Borrell, the foreign policy director of the European Union, who justified the lying engaged in this kind of psychological warfare by saying foreign policy must maintain, quote, double standards, unquote. Borrell yesterday called for the European Union to train Ukrainian troops in neighboring countries, saying that it, quote, seems reasonable that a war is lasting. In other words, it's necessary to have more capability for sabotage, assassination, and wet works, given that this war is going to continue, even though the war is unwinnable, as is known, obviously, to those in NATO who are continuing to press ahead. So let's look at several other examples of NATO lies and hypocrisy, which are resulting in growing numbers of Ukrainian casualties, the very Ukrainian people Borrell claims that he is protecting and defending. Let's start with the story of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There was a session yesterday afternoon of the UN Security Council, an emergency session requested by Russia to determine what should be done about the attacks on the nuclear plant. Ukraine has been arguing that Russia is shelling its own security forces at the plant to make Ukraine look bad. And secondly, that Russia, by deploying heavy artillery inside the plant, makes it legal for Ukraine to shell the plant. Now, from the Ukrainian side, no evidence was submitted, described, or even alleged. The U.S. and Western allies accused Moscow of a scheme to, quote, steal Ukrainian electricity, unquote. Well, if that's their intention, why would they be shelling the plant to make it impossible to produce electricity? Now, the Russian ambassador then submitted photographic evidence of Ukrainian attacks on the plant, as well as high-resolution photos of the entire site to address the claim that the site is being turned into a military outpost. They also showed or presented the names of the Ukrainian artillery unit that's shelling the plant, and noted some of the strikes involved M777 howitzers provided by the Pentagon, the U.S. military. And the Russian ambassador said, "It seems that our colleagues exist in some kind of their own parallel reality, in which the Russian military shells the nuclear power plant it is protecting using American systems at that," unquote. Well, did anyone address this hypocrisy? Apparently not. Although it's reported that in the next days, the International Atomic Energy Agency director is going to go or make sure there's a mission to the plant to see if they can determine what's true. Now, a second example is the impending war crime tribunal that the Russians have set up to try Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian military. This is going to take place in the city of Mariupol, and it's going to involve testimony from former Azov Brigade members who were captured when the Azovstal plant fell to the Russians. Now, according to sources, there are reports that there's testimony from some of the Azov members that they were told by the Ukrainian military to torture and kill Russian POWs, as well as to continue holding out at the plant, even though there were many civilians who were there whose lives were put at risk, being used as shields by the Azov neo-Nazi regiment. Zelensky responded to the pending war crime tribunal by saying it is, quote, a despicable show trial, and it goes beyond what is acceptable. Well, why is he trying to prevent the tribunal from taking place? Why is he trying to minimize the testimony? And why is it the case that it's likely that the Ukrainians themselves fired upon the Azov battalion POWs to try and silence them? Now, in the midst of this, there's warnings that there will be an escalation in the fighting, especially if the Russians respond to the assassination by car bombing near Moscow. The U.S. Embassy yesterday urged its citizens to leave Ukraine now in the safest way possible, warning that there could be an escalation and they cannot protect the Americans who are still there. Sort of reminds you of what happened at the end in Afghanistan, doesn't it? When they didn't protect the Americans or the Afghan collaborators of the Americans. Well, we'll see what happens, but this is, again, more ominous signs of betrayal by the United States. Now, finally, in talking about wartime propaganda, it's worth taking a look at the motion that was filed in federal court yesterday by attorneys for Donald Trump in relationship to the raid on Mar-a-Lago and the so-called gathering of evidence in that trial, in that case, I should say. It's not a trial yet, since no charges have been filed. But what the Trump lawyers did was raise some extremely important questions. One of the most important is, how can the Justice Department be a neutral arbiter when it comes to whether documents seized are classified or not classified? Are they privileged communications? How could they be trusted, given their track record in Russiagate and their known political animus against former President Trump, including the misrepresentations that were made in the FISA court by the FBI in order to obtain warrants the last time around to spy on the Trump campaign? In talking about the unprecedented general search, they're saying that Trump and his attorneys were fully cooperative, and they go through a list of meetings that took place, which ended in June when the FBI said they would get back to him and never did. Now, I think the following characterizes the filing by the Trump legal team. They say that the Russian collusion case that was being made by the FBI and the Justice Department displayed biased FBI agents and officials. This is now from the legal complaint. Stories of FBI agents engaged in information laundering, where a fired informant continued to feed the FBI false information through a Department of Justice official. An FBI general counsel falsified documents to support a FISA warrant's penetration into then-candidate Trump's inner circle. And they conclude this section by saying, in light of recent FBI behavior, when President Trump is part of its aims, this court should feel obliged to demand candor and transparency, and not just trust assertions from the Justice Department. And it calls for appointing a special master. Now, given what's come out about the FBI Justice Department corruption when it came to Russiagate, the acceptance of lies, the promotion of lies, the use of leaks including leaks of those lies which the media treated and still today treats as legitimate, the demand for a truly impartial special master is entirely justified. That's my report for today. I'll be back again tomorrow.